Hello, my name is Kiriath, and today we are going to talk about Battle Ready, which is a new standard, essentially, that Games Workshop is putting forward for painted models on the tabletop. I've seen quite a bit of discussion about this, most of it positive, some of it negative, but for me, this is, I think, one of the... I was going to say it's a small thing, but it's a nice thing. Specifically, it's nice for newer players, newer people to the hobby, people who haven't maybe painted miniatures before, who don't really know where to start. Because up until this point, up until this kind of official definition that Games Workshop are putting out for their products, using their models, their paints, the term tabletop standard is so vast and wide and essentially just incomprehensible to, I think, a good portion of newer players that it may as well not be a definition at all. See, this is something that I've found with quite a few people when I've introduced them to the hobby or when I've shown different models to people. You will have those who consider essentially tabletop standard to be 3 colours, just got like a nice main colour, 1 highlight colour, and the guns are metal, and that's it. You're done, you're fine, don't even need to base, whatever, you're set. That's tabletop standard, it's got 3 colours on it, what more do you want? Then you've got those people whose definition of tabletop standard is significantly more detailed than that, who will present a model they've painted and gone, this isn't bad for tabletop standard. And then you look at it and it's got washes, it's got edge highlights, it just looks that little bit extra compared to the one that's just painted very basically. And there's no problem with painting basically, but if you are brand new to this hobby and you're looking for examples on, say, like Facebook or Twitter or Reddit, or if you're going on YouTube and looking up tutorials and stuff, it's two different levels, I'll say, which are being named the same thing. And don't even get me started on those incredibly annoying, really just disgustingly talented painters who will sit there and knock out like a Space Marine army in like a month and go, yeah, they're okay for tabletop standard, and it's like there's like mental blending going, all the power weapons look great, the non-metallic metal is just spot on, and they're like, yeah, it's not bad. And I'm looking at it going, if I could even achieve that paint job, that would be like a display miniature. Tabletop standard has never really meant anything. It's always been just an interpretive thing. One person thinks it's something incredibly basic, someone else thinks that it's something that's actually really quite advanced, especially if you are a brand new painter who's never picked up a brush before. We actually now have a genuine definition from Games Workshop. And I have seen a few people saying, well, I don't like that they have made a definition for this. I don't like that this is like a brand thing, that you can turn up to someone and go, look, my army is battle ready. Because does that not, reduce the amount of effort that people might be willing to put in? I mean, to be honest, there's a risk with anything that you do that it might reduce people's willingness to put effort in. Like that's nothing to do with a particular branding or a name for a particular style of paint scheme. That's just something that can happen at any point to anyone. Anyone can get to that point and go, I just can't be arsed with this anymore. That's not something that Games Workshop is necessarily responsible for. When it comes to something like this, though, you are actually going to have new players show up with armies, and they will be able to say, okay, this is the first army I've painted, I did it using these paints, and is that okay? Now, there is an actual standard now. There is a defined point at which it's like, well, yeah, great. Your army is absolutely spot on for the tabletop, you are ready to go, good work. I don't think that is something to be complaining about at all. I think it's a genuine positive step forward. It gives people a much more clearly defined basis for what they're doing. And for people who are more advanced, obviously that doesn't really matter. Like, you can do what you like in terms of painting your models. You can be as advanced as you want to be. You can invest as much time in a single model or an army as you want to invest. It's not really made, I think, for people who are already at the stage of deciding what quality of paint job they want their army to have, whether they want it to be tabletop, whether they want it to be display or golden demon or slayer's sword. It's entirely up to them. They have said that it's like, oh yeah, it's for everyone, and it is, and it does give a proper baseline for what to expect from an army on the tabletop. But it is definitely more skewed towards newer people. I mean, to be honest, it's one of those interesting things where I would consider, for instance, and this is just another part of why I really like this idea as a way of getting people to recognise a certain standard as being, this is acceptable for play. I would describe both my Emperor's Children and my Dreadnoughts as just tabletop standard. One takes significantly more effort than the other, by far. I mean, if I just grab one of my Emperor's Children over here, nowhere near finished because I'm actually trying to do a good paint job on these, which takes bloody ages, it turns out. So there's going to be far more variety in terms of colour, there's going to be more depth, there's going to be more variation. It will just be more detailed by far, this model, than my Redemptor army, for instance. I mean, a good example of that being, which one? Ah, there we go. This guy. Now, no base because it's about to be rebased. Oh, I'll show you the base in a sec. It's fucking amazing. So this Redemptor and this Emperor's Children Terminator, I would both consider those to be tabletop standard. The thing is, that is easy to paint. That's incredibly easy to paint. It's like, the Redemptor army was never going to be complex to paint. It is literally just a spray, a bunch of washes, and then rust all over the place with some green and a bit of purple for highlight. Like that's pretty much it. The time it took to paint this was actually significantly less than it's taken to paint this, and this isn't finished yet. But I would describe neither of these as being anything other than tabletop standard. I don't think that's good enough to be display standard, and even when I've finished, I wouldn't put it as, like, oh, I painted this as an entry to a competition, or as something that I would happily say that is one of the best models you'll see. None of that. They're both basically the same standard to me, just one's more easy than the other. And one definitely takes more effort than the other, but to someone new, that's going to be really confusing. It's like, well, how can you say that's easy and therefore it's fine, but then that's difficult, but it's also the same standard? That makes no sense. It doesn't. It's all entirely personal interpretation. And that's the main issue. And that's the main issue that has existed the entire time when it comes to painting miniatures. It's essentially who decides what is what quality, who decides whether a miniature is just good enough for the tabletop or good enough for a competition. It's a very subjective thing. Now, this just takes that subjectiveness away at the lowest point of entry, which is getting a painted army on the table. That, like, the value of that, I think, cannot be overstated. Finding motivation, finding something that drives you to paint is probably one of the more tricky parts of this hobby. And again, along with the contrast paints themselves, anything that gets people to a point where there is a recognisable standard that is achieved relatively easily for those who want or need that approach, that does nothing but enrich the hobby. Because it starts people going, okay, well, I've got my grey plastic, if I get some of the white primer, then I can use the contrast stuff, and then according to these videos that, I mean, they've said there's going to be tutorials on YouTube, Duncan's going to be going through it, they can look at those, they can go, okay, that's great, I've painted my entire army, that looks cool. The next army will probably be more complicated than that. And the one army after that will be more complicated again. They've got that recognisable standard. You've got that recognisable baseline. The thing that is put out there as being the solution to that question. Once you've done that, everything beyond that is still open to interpretation, but you have just a perfect level from which to jump off with your own interpretation as to what you might consider to be display or award-winning or whatever. It actually provides that nice, solid ground for especially new painters where they can go, okay, I know that that's great, now I can move on to try and make it more complicated. It's honestly genuinely a good thing. It's this, along with those contrast paints, I think they're doing a lot. They're doing a lot to really, like, push people into the, I'd say, the more creative side of the hobby, into the painting side of the hobby. And given the whole, like, the construction of models and armies around certain themes and colour schemes and stuff, that's my favourite part of it. So anything that encourages that, I cannot sit there and go, I don't like it, because it's just positive to me. So yeah, I like that they're defining this. I like that they're turning it into an actual thing, that it is like a recognisable brand kind of thing. that you will have that just easily recognisable standard level of painting for especially newer people in the hobby. It's good. It's really good. Now, before we finish, this guy's base, I got an email from a really just... I don't even know how to talk about this because it makes me wonder exactly what I've done to even deserve this kind of thing. But someone from Fluff and Fury, a guy called Joe, who very kindly made me some awesome stuff just because he wanted to. I have an actual base for this Dreadnought with the logo on it, and I've got 2 more that are unpainted. So I thought, of course, the most important things to get on these bases are the dude with the massive fist. You've got to have him on there, so he's going to be on that. And then the guy with the massive chainsword and the dude with the big rocket launcher. Chainsword guy is currently packed away, ready for a trip to Warhammer World. But yeah, he's also going to be on one of those bases. It's so good. I'm so happy. Absolutely awesome. So yeah, that is the stuff for Battle Ready. As I say, absolutely love it. Great move. Makes it recognisable. Makes it easy for people to get into the hobby. Not going to complain about that at all. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments down below. Where do you stand on the, like, kind of, on that original debate, actually, of the whole thing of what's tabletop standard, what's display standard, what is, like, middling, what is golden demon for you? It's like, have you ever had that conversation where you are trying to define what these are without confusing someone? And have you ever had that thing where you've seen a model that someone else has painted and gone, holy shit, that's amazing, and they're like, yeah, it's alright for play, but apart from that, it's not so good. Be really interested to see if anyone else has had that experience. I'm assuming a lot of you have. I've seen that God knows how many times. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments down below. In the meantime, feel free to click all of the things, Patreon, video, subscribe, all of that shit. Click it if you like, don't click if you don't want to, and I will see you for the next one. Toodaloo.